Welcome, everybody, to the New York Financial Writers Association. This is our first panel on artificial intelligence that I'm aware of, anyway. So I just wanted to hand it off to the panelists that we have. This is a really exciting event for the New York Financial Writers Association. Journalism has always been a disruptive kind of practice. The business is always being disrupted by technology, whether it's radio being disrupted by TV and TV being disrupted by cable and cable being disrupted by the internet. Now we have AI coming into the picture. So we're here to talk about all angles of that. And so, Emily Bary, I'm going to hand it off to you. Emily Bary is Assistant Managing Editor for MarketWatch. We have Leon Yin, who's investigative data journalist at Bloomberg News. And we have Professor Oded Netzer at Columbia Business School and also Vice Dean of Research over there. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. And let me kick it off to Emily. There's so much to talk about, I guess. So I'll hand it off to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us today, and just wanted to echo Steve there. It's such an exciting time in journalism now. AI is touching so many beats, and it's also changing the way we think about our profession. I'm a technology reporter, and I know I'm writing about all sorts of things that I never would have imagined, quantum computing and nuclear power, and it's just touching everything around us. And I'm so lucky that we have two great experts here, Professor Oded Netzer of Columbia and Leon Yin of Bloomberg. So I'm gonna, leave it to them to educate you all today. And to start, I'd like for Professor Netzer to maybe give us the lay of the land of how much AI has evolved in just the last few years, since the advent of ChatGPT. And so do you want to take it away, Professor Netzer?
Yeah, back in November of, I guess, 2022, and end of November of 2022, when I first opened ChatGPT for the first time, it was one of these moments that I said to myself, the world will never look the same, right? And it's actually not that common that we have these moments in technology, meaning technology is often fairly continuous, the evolution of that. And yet that was a real regime shift in the way, at least we as consumers have seen AI. If you think about it, if you compare, for example, to what we were using at the time, I mean, think about Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, and where ChatGPT was at that point in terms of the interactions with humans, that was already a true regime shift to where we are in terms of generative AI and ability to interact with a machine. And to some extent, we generally think about technology as developing in a more of an exponential manner, right? I mean, Moore's law and so on, kind of multiplying itself, right, from one generation to another. When we think more about our expectations as humans, we tend to think more linearly. Just our brain works more. If I saw that much of a development in technology last year, I expect the same development next year. Which means that because technology is going more exponentially and our expectations are more linear, there is a whole period where actually our expectations are above the technology. And that's what happens to us, I think, for a long time with think again, Siri or Alexa and all of these assistants. We expected them to be better than they are. And then at some point, I would argue November of 2022, ChatGPT was maybe that period, is where the expectation meets or the technology meets expectations. And if we believe this exponential growth, it actually doesn't look back. Meaning now we're going to start seeing technology, and we're already seeing, I would argue, technology that is often cases actually higher than expectations. And a lot of it has to do with the computer power, it has to do with data, and it's primarily had to do with context, with the fact that these newer models that at the time it was a GPT 3.5 and since then keep growing, these models are able to understand more and more context. Think about context as being the words around the focal word that it's trying to understand or predict the next word. And that context has been growing significantly from previous models. And we as humans, we are very good in understanding context. Machines have been learning this over time. It requires a lot of computer power to understand context. And that's part of what happened back in again 2023, and is to some extent continuing to happen with these models becoming more and more sophisticated by understanding more of the context around every single word. I'm a professor. It was a short question and a very long answer, so
No,
apologies.
that was great. And DeepSeek earlier this year kind of rocked people's understanding of at least AI as it relates to the market and just what's possible in terms of like business models and market leaders and stuff like that. Do you want to give us your view of sort of how DeepSeek changed or didn't change things?
Sure. So, I mean, the main thing with DeepSeek was that DeepSeek, for the first time, showed that these models, as I mentioned, these models use a lot of context being the data and the connections between words. And that has been very expensive in terms of use of what is called GPUs. GPUs, think about them as the power underlying these models, the computing power underlying these models that have been very, very expensive. And what DeepSeek demonstrated was that we are actually capable of doing this at a much lower cost. So we are able to estimate these models at a lower cost than previously known, or the biggest competitor, Nvidia, is the one, or not competitor necessarily to DeepSeek, but the provider of these GPUs, these computing powers, right? It requires these heavy GPU machines created by Nvidia in order to estimate these models. And what that created was the understanding that maybe we can estimate these models with less investment. Now, I think it was a bit overreaction. My personal view is that it was a bit of an overreaction for a couple of reasons. By the way, the reaction was that stocks of companies like Nvidia dropped, I think, 10% on that day, just because of that, dropped 10%. And the idea was that people would not need these heavy computing now to do the same thing, to build models like ChatGPT. I think it was an overreaction for a couple of reasons. First, everybody who was in this area, who worked in this area, knew that the cost would go down, as cost goes down for almost every technology that we are familiar with. So we expected it to go down. We may not have expected it to go down as fast as DeepSeek claimed that they did. But to be honest, the claim was also probably bigger than reality, in the sense that they attributed it directly to the cost of running the model. Whereas, of course, when ChatGPT does it, it's not just running the model. There is the data and there is other costs that go into it. So I think the claim of how much cost saving was maybe a little bit overstated. The second reason why maybe the reaction was overstated, if it's true. So let's imagine that indeed we have now models like DeepSeek that are able to do, or to build models like ChatGPT at a much lower cost. That means that if I'm, say, a startup, and I want to, what is called fine-tune the model, take the model and adjust it to my own environment, right? I need a lot of computing power, but a startup cannot afford to buy many of these Nvidia GPUs as Microsoft buys or Amazon buys or any of these large organizations. But if now small startups can do it at home, meaning can build their own model, that means the demand for GPUs actually would not go down, would go up. Because if previously it's only the large organization that did it, now we'll get more demand, but for much fewer. Meaning the reason why the stock dropped was, well, maybe Microsoft doesn't need thousands of these, maybe they only need hundreds. But then we'll get a lot of small companies that would buy single unit of these GPUs and will be able to do quite a bit with it. So it's not clear to me actually that should lead just to a decrease in stock prices, for example, for something like Nvidia, because we could now see demand for Nvidia from players that wouldn't even buy it before because they couldn't do much with a single or two units of these GPUs.
Yeah, you mentioned last time we talked that at a place like Columbia, maybe only a few departments or
Right.
less have access to this, and you were saying it could kind of become more widespread, and that's like one example of the proliferation potential.
Right. I mean, maybe universities are not the biggest consumers of it, but
Sure.
I think that, as you mentioned, they're a good example for it. So previously, you would find them in the medical school, you would find them in engineering. The business school has a few of them, but you wouldn't necessarily find the linguistic department, right, buying one of these, machines, Nvidia machines. But now, if we can estimate it on a simpler model with one machine, maybe other groups within the university, or think about journalism, right? Newspapers may want to adopt this and use it on their own, even if they don't have, again, the resources to necessarily buy, a full farm of of these Nvidia GPUs.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And you've given a great overview of how much AI has changed. There's also been a lot of talk about how AI can change the way we work, not just us as journalists, but the human population.
Right.
And there's been, some reporting out there or studies and whatnot saying so many jobs could be replaced by AI. You have like visions of this Jetsons world where everything's a
Right.
robot. Do you want to give us your point of view on kind of what separating fact from fiction and what sort of work will survive and what sort of work is maybe at risk?
Yeah. My view on AI and future of work, or AI and jobs, I tend to think about it not so much as AI and jobs, but rather AI and tasks. There are certain tasks that AI does very well, and certain tasks that AI does less well, at least for now, and maybe for a while. And once we start taking the world, taking the workplace, and rather than thinking about a job, we think about tasks, we can ask ourselves, what tasks can AI take away? And if I have another hour of the day because AI took that task, how would I best allocate this my time to different tasks, right? And I'll give you a few examples of these, right? First of all, most employers, most people in their work life, we have we do more than one task. An administrative assistant, right, does probably good 100 tasks, different tasks, right? A journalist needs to read, needs to write, needs to edit, right, needs to do a bunch of this research, a bunch of tasks that eventually lead to an article. So we all do different combinations of tasks in order to determine the job that is called a journalist, or a job that is called a doctor or administrative assistant. Now, think about it. When you go to a doctor, a physician, you go to a physician, and big proportion of the time of you spending the time with the physician in the office, the physician sits with the back to you, typing what you're saying and typing the meeting and then the prescription. Now, that is a classic example of a task that AI could already replace. It could listen to the conversation and dictate it to the computer. So the physician can actually spend time with the patient as opposed to spending time in front of the computer, right? And so imagine if physicians actually had more time to spend with us, because the typing of your condition and what to prescribe would go just simply automatically to the computer. We would actually be in a better world of where doctors spend their time. There is an interesting case study that was written here at Columbia around financial advisors. And when they brought in AI helped preparing them for the meeting. AI helped summarizing information, creating charts, and so on. What did it allow the financial advisor to do? To make more phone calls, to spend more time with the clients, which is what we want them to do, right? I mean, we actually do benefit from them spending these times. So as we are thinking about tasks and jobs, I encourage us to think about the tasks that AI does well, and the tasks that, if it does well, there is no reason not to give the task to AI, right? And the more you think about our jobs, I've at least realized that the tasks that AI takes are often the tasks I don't enjoy doing. I mean, I don't enjoy proofreading my documents. I mean, journalists probably likes writing, but not proofreading, right?
Yeah.
If I can give it to I have more time to do what I enjoy and actually more useful at doing, right? I don't enjoy creating graphs. I enjoy interpreting graphs. If I can let AI create the graph, or talk to AI to tell AI what graph I want, and then I interpret the data, I'll spend more time in doing what I enjoy doing, and maybe less in what I enjoy less doing. Now, there are certain jobs that are single task jobs that AI can replace. I'll give you an example. Translators, simultaneous translators. They kind of have one task, very difficult task, by the way. It's probably the definition of multitasking, of hearing and translating at the same time, but it's a single multitask task, right? AI getting very, very good at it, and it's possible that we will not need any more translators, right? Simultaneous translators. There are single job tasks that AI is unlikely to replace. Think about a kicker in football. They have a single task to kick the ball, right? AI, at least for now, doesn't do it well, and therefore the task would remain. For the one that are multitask, as most of our jobs, it will take some and leave others. I think we should be, again, thinking about it as enhancer as opposed to replacer in most cases. Including, by the way, journalism. I really think that the fear of it in journalism is a bit overstated, in the sense that still a lot of the creativity and the what to research, what to look for, right? I mean, as the internet has changed the world of journalism, and I would argue in a good way, right? Not just as far as the promotion of the article he writes, but in writing the articles. In the same way, I think that it can actually free time of journalists to the tasks that they really enjoy doing, these investigation and research and the writing, but the not necessarily the proofreading level of writing, or the tactics of writing.
Got it. Yeah, I think all of your answers have kind of shown that it's important to think critically about the things you're hearing about AI. Everything from DeepSeek's going to ruin the chip business to AI is going to take all of our jobs. And as reporters, when you have such a big thing and a transformational thing like this, I think it's so important to really dig into what you're hearing. And that's why I'm so glad that we have Leon here. I'd like to kind of transition over to him now to talk about some of the great work he's done investigating AI. So Leon, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me here. Much of what I do is investigate the social impact of AI, and so even things that sound like they work quite well, oftentimes are use cases that can be very detrimental. I mean, just translation alone, there was a piece about 2 years ago about asylum seekers whose interviews were transcribed automatically, and they were denied asylum because an I became a we. And that one small change was the difference between getting asylum and not getting asylum. And so there are always costs for these errors. And the question is always who's to be held accountable and what happens when things don't work. So when I joined Bloomberg about a year and a half ago, this is about a year after ChatGPT was released. And we really want to do an investigation just looking at the social implications of, chatbots. And so Davey Alba and I, who's a wonderful reporter, we're trying to figure out areas in which AI was already in use, specifically generative AI. And what we found very quickly was a cottage industry of HR vendors and hiring firms using AI to screen resumes. This includes many small vendors across the country, as well as very well-known names such as LinkedIn, which aggressively apply generative AI to all facets of its platform, including for finding great candidates for jobs. We took inspiration from a landmark economic study from about 2002, 2003, in which economists assigned fictitious names to resumes. These names were those that were traditionally for African Americans and traditionally for white people. And they sent them to real jobs in Boston and looked at the callback rates. And what they found are that Black names were getting less callbacks. That became kind of a landmark study in what's called like a hiring discrimination study or an audit study. And we had tried to reproduce that in the AI era. And we did it by basically finding several real job applications for like a financial analyst, a software engineering role, a retail role, an HR role. And we had 8 distinct resumes, which are pretty much equally qualified. And we were able to use public records to come up with 800 names that are distinct to demographic groups, including Hispanic, Asian, white, and black names for men and women. So there's 100 each. And for each of these resumes, we assign one name from one group. We give GPT the job title, the description of the job, and say, can you rank the candidates? Who's the most qualified and who's the least qualified? And we repeated this thousands of times for GPT 4 and 3.5. And what we found were that there are differences in who was getting the top rated spot, right? Who was the most qualified candidate? And those differences surpassed what's called adverse impact benchmarks, which are used in the legal system, or at least they were before it was repealed this year, for historical hiring discrimination cases from Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And what we found are that the biases were not consistent across groups, but they adhered to stereotypes. And so let me just give you a few examples of some large gaps we found. For a financial analyst role, we found that Asian men and women were the top ranked candidates. So if everything was fair or random, each group would get top ranked 1/8 of the time because there's 8 resumes, right? Repeat 1,000 times. What we found were Asian women were top ranked 17% of the time, whereas names that are distinct to black men were top ranked only 7.6% of the time. So there's a huge disparity in how these names were treated. Because the inputs are so sensitive to these models, even something as trivial as your name can lead to a racialized outcome in this high stakes environment. And we produced several kind of visualizations and to demonstrate how even names have different so-called latent space, how they're perceived and encoded within these models, and how that subtle change is enough to nudge in a certain direction. Of course, this is like a fictitious experiment. And one of the most difficult parts of reporting on this is the opacity for job seekers. When you're applying for a job, you're not often told why you were denied that job. There's no transparency into who made that decision, let alone if it was done algorithmically. Further, hiring discrimination in the United States is super difficult to prove. The onus lies completely on the applicant, and they don't have basically, the same kind of statistics about how everyone else was treated for that job. So it's a very tricky situation. Taking a step back, a lot of these applications in AI are very difficult to track down, and largely because they're enterprise products. So many of the hiring tools using AI now are enterprise. What that means is that we cannot access them as reporters, right? So typically what I do is I get my hands on an algorithm or like a piece of technology and I test it. But it's almost impossible to do that when there's enterprise involved because I have to talk to a sales rep, I have to tell them I'm a journalist and that I basically want to see if their product is fair or not. And most people just tell me to buzz off. So that's a real concern that I have. And I think that's something that we should all be very weary of, especially if we're in the accountability realm of how to keep track of these applications, especially when we can't access them.
Got it. No, that is a fascinating story, and a good cautionary tale, I think. You mentioned the process of trying to get access to these enterprise apps and the fact that they're gatekept a bit. Do you have any other thoughts you want to share on how data journalists in general are using AI and tools that can be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was speaking before about how to investigate AI, but there are also applications in how AI can be incorporated in the news gathering process. One thing that I find super difficult is that you look at any of the tools and they're right about like 99 or 98% of the time. But as journalists, we have to be 100% certain about everything we publish, right? So oftentimes you kind of just move the manual labor down. So I'll give you a few cases that work quite well for kind of the development process, not so much like the finished product. One thing that works really well is called semantic search, and it's basically AI is really good at determining the similarity between things. And so if you're looking for specific like phrases in speeches or kinds of emails in an email dump or different kinds of bills that have been passed, it's really easy to find similar text, right? Even if they don't use exact words. That's a super useful thing to help us quickly identify things that might be relevant. But ultimately, I kind of, at its current state, I view AI kind of like an intern. where it's helpful and it can save some time, but really you can't trust it with that much. And so you have to kind of step in and verify everything. And so verification's the name of the game, and there are ways to save time. One thing that I think works really well too, which isn't as novel now, is image recognition. So some of my colleagues have done great work analyzing satellite imagery and trying to find things like buildings or like boats, right? Shapes. This is something that's been working quite well for maybe 5 years or so. So right now we're currently in the text progression, but images have been I wouldn't say solved, but the technology works quite well.
Got it.
But yeah, so I mostly use it. I mean, also it's good for administrative work. So I know others who use it to kind of explore a data set and also to write code for something to save some time. I don't currently do that, but that's because I'm old school and I like to do everything myself. But
Yeah.
I will learn because I don't want to be left behind. But yeah, I'm still kind of old school as you tell. Like I do a lot of things manually or pseudo manually because I am paranoid and want to trust everything, and so that's just part of the game. Yeah.
Well, I get that too. It's hard to turn things over to the computers and let them think and then trust. Professor Netzer, anything you want to add to that just on
Yeah.
how journalists can prepare for this world?
Yeah, and maybe a couple of thoughts on Leon. Very fascinating study there with the resumes as well as on the journalism. First on the resume study. I mean, at the end of the day, unfortunately, AI is a bad mirror to our face, right? I mean, the reason why AI behaves the way it does is because we do. Now, that doesn't clean AI because one of the differences between AI and us is that AI perpetuates it because now people keep using it, and as Leon mentioned, that leads to perpetuating the bias. Even if the bias has been improving, we're actually not allowing it to improve to some extent. I mean, there is the kind of a famous example from the early days of Gmail, where Gmail started doing the autocomplete, which is AI. I mean, the early days of AI to some extent. And when they did it, when they started filling in our emails, right? You type an email, and one of the examples was that they were writing, I have a meeting with an investor, and it completed, when do you want to meet him? It auto-completed investor to him as opposed to her. Now, again, if you are Google at that point, the solution was pretty easy. What they did is they said, well, in our autocomplete, we will totally ignore any pronouns, right? So they decided not to autocomplete pronouns. So the solution was much easier than in cases that Leon talks about. But there is maybe a silver lining, by the way, because teaching humans to avoid bias is incredibly hard, right? I mean, it's very hard for us to correct our biases. The good news is machines, it's often a parameter to be tuned, right? Meaning if we recognize the bias, and that's a difficulty that Leon talked about, that particularly if I don't have access to the data, I don't even recognize the bias. But once we recognize it, the fix is much easier than with humans. Going to an interviewer or the person, a human who screens these resumes and trying to fix the bias is much harder than actually tweaking a parameter in the model to fix it. So there is maybe a silver lining to that story too. As far as the usage, I mean, yes, I 100% agree on the facts, meaning as journalists, we need to remember our name is on the article, right? It's true for me as well as a researcher. When I write an academic paper, my name is on the article, and that means whether I use, as Leon said, a research assistant, right? Or whether I used generative AI, my name is on it, and therefore everything in it I should be responsible for. But if you think about an article, right? I mean, out of 1,000-word article, there may be 100 words that are facts. The rest is either opinions or the way we express the facts. And in that part, AI can be very useful in helping us express, meaning the good news is humans, we know what are the facts. We know what needs to be a fact. We don't know what the fact is maybe, and it requires research. But we are very good at distinguishing between any date is a fact, any name of a person is a fact, right? And the other aspect that we acknowledge our opinions and our judgment about it, and therefore we should be using appropriately Gen AI. The other thing to keep in mind, there are LLMs, large language models, and then there are generative AI systems. So ChatGPT is a generative AI system. It's not inside there is an LLM, a large language model. What the large language model does, it predicts the next word. And when it predicts the next word, it tends to do these hallucinations that we all see. Now, they all make sense. That's even worse, right? I mean, it's not just that it's wrong, it is seemingly right, right? Because it's used the best predictive to give me the name of the person who most likely wrote this article, right? So if I would look for an article, or if I would look for investigative reporting around AI, it may make up an article written by Leon, even though Leon never wrote it, because prediction is that Leon would most likely have written this, right? So this is the LLMs, what the LLM does. Most of the tools today are within a Gen AI system that have something called RAG, without getting into the retrieval algorithm, that brings in information from the internet that is not part of the generative AI. And that's where the facts can come, and you get a link and you can click on the link, and therefore you can check the facts. So particularly for journalists, it's important to realize the difference between a pure language model that simply predicts and therefore likely to have things that are likely but could be incorrect or non-factual, and the RAG algorithm, or whatever it is connected to the internet and brings in information that is actually factual and comes with a source and the link. And of course, you should always click on the link and make sure that this is correct. The same is true, by the way, for calculations, or Leon mentioned programming, right? If you write a code. LLMs, when you ask LLM what is 1 + 1, it uses the predictive algorithm to calculate it. If you use the Gen AI system, it actually would write a Python code to calculate 1 + 1, which is A, likely to be more correct than the prediction, and B, now you have a code. You can actually go and look at the code. So for Leon, who likes to write his own code, you can actually use the Gen AI system. It would output for you the code, and now you can look at the code and modify it and make it your own the way you would want it to be. So the distinction between just large language models, what, for example, GPT 3.5 was, and today the system we work in that have also these other components, is very important, and important to realize these differences.
Awesome, thank you. And I want to leave some time for questions, but maybe one more from me before we go to that. I know through my attempts to cover AI, there are some things that come up. One is like you get these very technical scientific papers, like the paper that DeepSeek sort of put out, like pretty unintelligible to the average person. And then you also have this trend of companies like slapping AI on everything, and every company says they're doing AI, and it can be hard to figure out who's really doing it and who's putting the hot name of the day on something. So do you guys have thoughts on just how journalists can build expertise and really work to separate fact from fiction there?
Leon, you want to start? You're the journalist.
Sure. I always just follow my moral compass and my bullshit detector. But also I always just think about, I just treat every piece of technology like it's a black box, and really just think about the inputs and the outputs, right? So what are the effects, or what's the result of this piece of technology that's being called AI? So that's how I view it. It's and then asking lots of questions. The difficulty is that normally the people who are hyping this up aren't the people implementing it, and so you won't always get a great answer. But I find that it's always helpful if you get to like the ground floor of how something is working, to meet someone or to be the person to be able to translate it into human terms. And I think that that's a great mark of difficulty and intelligence, of being able to explain the difficult things easily. And many engineers struggle with that. and marketing people gloss over it. So you have to be discerning.
Definitely.
On the complex stuff, on the academic papers, I actually ran the following experiment. I took 30 papers that were fairly complex, and I put them through generative AI, through ChatGPT, and asked, it was actually Claude, not ChatGPT. And I asked Claude to summarize it as if it's a PhD student who's summarizing this for a lay language. And then I sent the paper to the author. So I took 30 authors. I asked I asked generative AI to create, and then asked them, do you think it's better or worse than a typical typical PhD student summarizing your own paper to English, right? So these are people who obviously knew the truth. I wanted people who actually know what the paper is about. And the majority of them said it was better than what they would see from a human. So if you get one of these complex papers, actually Gen AI is pretty good at that. It's pretty good at taking it and converting it to the essence of it. I don't know if you've at some point there was this Notebook LM created by it's a Google product called Notebook LM. It does even better. What it does, I tried it on my own papers. You put an academic paper and you click to create a podcast out of it. And after about 3 minutes, you will get a podcast of your paper, conversation between two fake humans discussing your own paper. And I have to say, it was very good. And not only that what was very good, the thing it did really well, it says, these two people talk to each other and say, you know what I found interesting in this paper? And then they go and explain what was the interesting part. And if you think about it, the concept of what's interesting, particularly in an academic paper, which is really hard, is very difficult. It's not an easy task. And they did a better job than I would do in my own papers, kind of honing in on really what was interesting to the lay reader of the paper, not necessarily to academics. So again, there are tools that do it, and they're doing it pretty well. I do agree with Leon on the more BS detectors. I don't think AI is any different from any other previous or non-previous. Think about financial markets, right? I mean, people use the same fancy method, and you're like, I don't know if this is real or not. Same BS detector as you would use in any other context, I think apply here as well.
Definitely. And yeah, I echo what you said about the notebook LLM. It's crazy to hear, voices talking about your work. We tried it over where I am, just plugging in a bunch of random articles, and it was amazing what it could do. Like we plugged in just some random ones, like one about people were turning down wedding invites, and one about how athletes were making more money through the NIL, way to capitalize on their names. And it was amazing what it put together. It was like the theme of this is that life is just getting more expensive. And we were like, oh, these are just some random articles. Like we didn't think of that when we tried this experiment, but it really can synthesize things and be a great tool to learn about things and just put things together. So I think Steve was taking questions. Not sure if there are any, but if anyone wants to pipe up here or put them in the chat, we can move on to that portion.
Yeah, I was just want to tell people, I sent a message around to the chat, but I don't see too any questions at the moment. So we can go on and talk about a little bit more about AI. And I mean, you guys really covered a lot of really interesting topics. It's really incredible. Leon, yeah, give us any other samples of some of your recent articles. I didn't mean to butt in on Emily. I just wanted to ask a question. Sorry,
Go for it. Anyone can
be quiet.
Anyone can
I'm gonna
ask.
be quiet now.
My recent articles haven't been on AI, but we had a great piece about crowdsourcing data from drivers in New York City for Uber and Lyft who were getting locked out of their jobs that you can check out. That came out this fall. And then recently we also had a piece about the political podcasters that had Trump on right before the election. And many of the things that they said are prescient about what we're seeing now. So sorry I can't have a cool AI answer.
No,
I'm working hard to to get some more stories on AI. Oh.
no, that's great. And the story you mentioned earlier was really interesting. And actually, Leon, if you want to drop the link to that in the chat, the AI story, maybe that would be helpful for people to read that.
So
We also,
we got some
yeah.
questions here.
Yeah, I can go through the questions. So we
Okay.
have one from David. He asked, what skills should journalists and writers focus on in the AI era to have the most value versus the tasks that AI can handle? Not sure who wants to take that, but I know Professor Netzer, you had some
I can
thoughts there.
start. Yeah. I mean, first, I always say you won't be replaced by AI. You will be replaced by someone who knows what to do with AI. So the first skill is to learn to interact with AI and use it as an assistant, as a colleague, as someone who whispers in your ear, right? I mean, learning how to use it well. But what does it mean to learn to use it well? Again, we talked about something already about this distinction between facts and more of writing style and this is clearly a place to keep in mind. The other dimension is thinking about the prompts and playing around with prompts. People call it prompt engineering. I'm not sure why the word engineering is there. It's a skill, it's a maybe even a science. I'm not of engineering, but what is the right way to ask a question, and how do we, for example, do we ask the most general question? Are we becoming more specific? Or even, I'm going to give it my previous article or my most related article as part of the prompt to say, this is an article that I have written before. Now I want to write about this topic. And then you provide all of the other information. Now, you may find that as you are making your prompt longer and longer, there is something called the attention problem, that it's almost like humans. It's forget what was early on and it focus more on the recent stuff that you're putting in the prompt. But generally, the most models, the more specific you are in the prompt, the better it will behave. And don't get lazy with the prompt. We tend to get lazy because we want to kind of see the results. So we put like 2 lines and we say one line and we say, let's see what it provides. But actually, there is real value in playing with it. And I'm already picking into Catherine's question as well. I actually have a little bit of the opposite view that Gen AI takes us back to our childhood in a good way. So when we were kids, we ask a lot of questions, right? I mean, a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, right, ask a lot of questions. And they ask, why is the moon up there, right? And the parents try to get away with a very simple answer, and the kids is not happy. So what do? They ask again, and they ask again why, and yet again why, until they get an answer they're happy with, right? I mean, kids are very good in insisting of asking the questions until they get the answer, right? Now we go to school, and the kids go to school, and then they're kind of tamed on their asking question, meaning they ask a question, if you don't get an answer, you realize you shouldn't be asking anymore, so you kind of stop asking. And as we become adult, we stop asking the questions, right? We ask once, and if we get a bad answer, maybe we'll try once more, but after that, it's impolite, right? But I actually think that when Gen AI came, the more ChatGPT prompt, right? We ask a question, we don't get a good answer, what do? We revise the question. And we don't get a good answer, we keep revising the question. So to some extent, I think it taught us a skill that we all had as kids and forgot, how to revise and insist on questions, and for 2 reasons. I don't care that this AI gonna be impatient with me as my parents were when I was a kid, right? And second, I get an immediate feedback loop of questions and answers, so I can continue asking and continue getting questions. So to some extent, there is something nice about that. But my point with this long answer is try out different prompts and learn what prompts tend to work for you, for the way you work, and for what it is that you're looking for. I think it's one of the most important one, trying different tools sometimes. I find, for example, that for summarizing information, Claude works sometimes better than ChatGPT, though again, most of these tools are pretty good. The other thing is leveraging the difference between asking Gen AI just a question and expect an answer, versus providing a PDF or providing a text to ChatGPT. I find, for example, that if I take an article and I said, can you tell me about this article? It does an okay job with lots of mistakes. If I upload the paper and say, can you summarize this paper? It tends to be much more accurate, right? So uploading information, I find it to be a very useful way of interacting with AI.
Sure. No, that's helpful. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, so for those who didn't see Catherine's question, she asked, any thoughts on how generative AI might push people to be less logical and thoughtful and become more childlike, or would it encourage other types of human behavior? For example, financial advisors, would they just chat about baseball and then send customers to listen to what the chatbot has to say on presumably financial matters and kind of do all the heavy lifting, whereas maybe the relational part is what stays. So you did tackle a bit of that. Maybe the second portion, do you have thoughts on?
I mean, I think actually it may. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with this. I actually think that, I mean, take the example of chatbots or call centers. We hate talking to machines, right? We call and we don't get to talk to a human. It drives us nuts, right? But I think what is likely to happen. By the way, we have seen this in the early days of the internet and what this did to call centers. What is likely to happen to call centers is that your simple questions up to a much better level than right now. Right now, you know, the computer can tell you your balance of your account and about that. And the simple tasks are going to be answered by the machine until the machine gets to a point where it's kind of stuck. And then it's going to move to the human. So I think for example, what we're going to see in call centers is that there will be upskilling of the level of people in call centers, because they won't need to deal with the simple stuff. The simple stuff will be dealt in a conversation, like, again, unfortunately, not what they, or fortunately, not the unfortunate situation we are now in call center when we talk to machines. But actually, the humans would deal with the more complex stuff. The humans will need to deal with the more complex questions of these. Yes, they will play golf with their clients, but at the same time, I think they would also need to answer the more difficult questions that it's not clear that AI can answer. So I think we'll see, to some extent, in many cases, actually upskilling of, or again, take the example I provided before of the physicians. Physicians not typing my visit would free them to actually deal with what they spend a good 7-8 years in school learning to do and experience they've collected, rather than typing.
Got it. Yeah, and you mentioned prompting earlier. Carolyn has a question there. She says, I find it could be hard to write a prompt that reflects my vocabulary or grammatical choices, which are very tied to her publication's house style. Do you have any hints on that?
Try to upload your writing and say, can you writing in this style? Upload even 2-3 examples from your own articles. But I do agree. I'm struggling with that. It didn't fully fix the problem. It didn't learn. And by the way, I think we will be moving toward that. People talk about 2025 as the year of AI agency, meaning we'll all have AI as agents of ourselves. Meaning right now, the way we interact with it is I go to ChatGPT and Emily, you go to ChatGPT, and we get for the same prompt about the same answer.
Yeah.
Now imagine that now we have actually on my Outlook or Gmail, we have an AI that read all of my emails, right? And therefore knows exactly how I am writing and is likely to know that I start with a hi or a hey and not so much with dear, right? And so on and so forth. And would actually write things the way that we write. So I think we will be moving more and more we're not there yet, but we are moving more and more towards a world where AI would learn, again, with all of the privacy issues with it, right? This AI would read all of our emails, but would actually learn to interact the way it would be an agent on our behalf, as opposed to right now it's kind of a one agent that serves everybody. It will be much more of each one of us going to have an agent that's going to do what we want them to do.
Yeah, it does seem like personalization is kind of the next leg there. Um, and Catherine has a question. She asked if journalists will have to start using Sam Altman's WorldCoin iris scanning tool to ensure proof of humanity. I guess when interviewing sources and you know, making sure they know that we're humans and that we're talking to humans. Um, yeah, do you have thoughts on that? And
I mean, it's an excellent question. It's
yeah,
really an excellent question, and I think it's the one that, to me, in particularly for this crowd, as journalists, I think is the biggest one. And by the way, it's not just for you talking to others; it's for me as a reader of your articles. How do we get to a world in which I know who wrote what I'm reading, right? And I don't think that the industry on itself is going to regulate itself. I think we do need some regulation there in order to create a world where we know where the data we are consuming came from and whether it's a human or non-human type data. Maybe the good news is that with social media, it took us 10 years before we let the cat guard the milk, before we took away the regulation outside of the companies of the social media companies. I think now we are starting at least earlier on, but it's far from being solved. I think it's a real problem, and I hope that we'll get to a situation where there will be some stamp on every piece written or spoken on who am I talking to a human? Am I reading a human? So I think it's also something all of us as journalists or myself as an academic researcher write articles. I hope that we'll get first to the norm, if not the rule, where we acknowledge what was the role of AI in that piece, right? And how did I use it?
sure. Yeah, that kind of gets back to the ethical issue that the journalism industry is facing right now. Um, you know, newsrooms seem to be moving at different paces, and there's probably temptation to use these tools, which in some cases potentially can be helpful, and in other cases might lead to trouble. Yeah, do you want to talk more about the stamp, like how you talked about sort of a ethical stamp of AI usage? How are you guys thinking about that in academia, and how could that be translated to journalism?
So academia is moving, for example, to a world in which you're supposed to write in the acknowledgement parts of your paper. How did you use AI? For what task did you use AI? I don't know that it's still widespread in journalism world, but in academic world, it becomes more and more the expectations from journals that you will acknowledge to the reader how did you use AI in writing these. Um, it's still very much, of course, you need to trust the researcher, though in academic research anyway, a lot lies in trusting the researcher. I hope we will adopt something similar. And again, I mean, we need to distinguish between, look, I don't write in academic paper, and most of you as journalists do not write. I use a spell checker, right? I mean, that's a form of AI. Spell checkers are a form of AI,
Yeah.
and we don't write it, and that's okay, right? It's so commoditized and so much, and there is little insight into it. So where to put the bar, I think, is the real question of what's considered beyond the spell checking type of reality. I mean, if I use it just for styling, did I use it to search? Did I use it to write even pieces of the article or the entire article?
Got it. Yeah. And Lawrence has a question too. He asks, what are journalists using AI for? He assumes they aren't just inputting their notes and asking AI to write the story for them. Um, are you guys able to take that one, or
Leon, you're probably better than I am to answer this one.
I think every transcription tool we use for our basically like our interviews to get the text are all already using AI. So, Otter is a tool that people are using quite frequently now. So many of these applications aren't even something you would even think of as AI, but it is. But that's something that I think many people are already using. And then I think everything else varies from newsroom to newsroom and person to person. But I think the key is just knowing what its strengths and limitations are for each specific kind of AI, like whether that's a chatbot and an LLM or something else. Uh, but yeah, I think it differs person to person. But really, it's about knowing what it's good at and what we're good at.
Thank you. Yeah, and Lawrence is now coming to me. Um, for years where we have these automated stories that run and they go up periodically. They're bylined as automation. They're very clearly marked as automation. They certainly read as automation. And they're just like doing kind of like simple stock move stuff. So they're saying like Boeing is the best stock in the Dow today, and here's how much it's up. And um, it's rote work. It's stuff I don't even know if we would have done as humans. But it adds a bit of kind of like flavor on the market. Um, I think it's very clearly marked as AI and automated. It's been going on longer than ChatGPT was in the world, or at least a name known to people. I think places are using it in various ways. Um, I think a lot of places are wary of the question you put in there, like people asking AI to actually do writing. Um, I don't think that's something that's happening at like most serious newsrooms, like under a person's byline.
But I mean, what I find it to be useful, by the way, it's not doing the writing, but kind of the writer's block thing where you are writing a paragraph and I'm like, something is missing here. I'm not happy with it, right? I find actually AI to be very useful in that, meaning I put in the paragraph that I wrote and I ask for few changes, not even one, because it can create multiples to see if I like something better than what I wrote, right? Sometimes it's kind of you feel like you're missing something in the way you wrote it. And I really find it to be useful in these aspects. And again, these are always cases where it's not about the facts; it's more of the writing style, and I'm just not finding it the way I want. I will say that many cases it makes it, for example, too formal to my taste, and I don't take it. Right? It's like I don't like this formal language. You can ask it to make it less formal, but it doesn't always listen to what you ask.
Um, awesome, thanks. And yeah, Terry asked how it's marked as AI. I just like pulled one up for my own reference here, and the byline says it's written by automation. The story itself is like 3 sentences, and then at the bottom it has an editor's note saying this was an auto-generated story, and there are a whole bunch of links kind of explaining that whole process.